The old Polaroid photograph trembles slightly in my hands as I stare at the faded image. A girl, no older than 12, stands rigidly before a looming Victorian house. Her eyes are hollow, vacant, as if something behind them has been extinguished. This is the first image I have of Eliza Blackwood. In the corner, the timestamp reads July 17, 1973. I couldn't have imagined the darkness I was about to uncover when I received the package containing these photographs and interview transcripts from my late uncle's estate. At Evergreen Children's Home in Millfield, Pennsylvania, a facility that shut its doors permanently in 1974, my uncle, Dr. Thomas I, had been a child psychologist. Among his patients was Eliza Blackwood, a case that, according to his notes, defied conventional explanation. Suffocatingly hot was the summer of 1973 in Pennsylvania. Across America, Nixon's Watergate hearings crackled through television sets. On AM radio, Led Zeppelin's Houses of the Holy played, and children rode Schwinn bicycles down suburban streets while their parents whispered about the oil crisis. Much as it always had, life in the small town of Millfield continued, quiet, predictable, unremarkable, until Eliza arrived. Lazily in the humid July breeze, the rusted sign swung as Officer Ray Dalton's police cruiser pulled up the gravel driveway of Evergreen Children's Home. The building itself, once a grand mansion owned by a coal baron at the turn of the century, now served as a state facility for orphaned and abandoned children. Its weathered brick facade and peeling white trim spoke of budget cuts and neglect. Turning to the social worker in his passenger seat, Ray asked, "You sure she hasn't said anything else?" In her lap, Margaret Collins clutched her vinyl handbag tightly, her knuckles white. "Not a word since we found her. Just keeps drawing those pictures." She nodded toward the manila folder balanced on the dashboard. "The parents' bodies were never found, officer. Not a trace." Flipping it open to reveal a child's crayon drawing, Ray pulled the folder toward him, crude stick figures lying underneath what appeared to be brown rectangular shapes. "And the house completely destroyed in the fire. Nothing left but the foundation and chimney." In the back seat, the passenger remained silent, staring out the window with unblinking eyes. Since she was found wandering along Route 27 3 days ago, Eliza Blackwood, age 12, hadn't spoken a word. Her nightgown was singed and her feet bare despite the broken glass and gravel. To the ground, the Blackwood family home, located 5 miles outside of town, had burned that night. Presumed dead were Robert and Sharon Blackwood, though their remains hadn't been recovered from the ashes. In the rearview mirror at the girl, Ray glanced. Too thin, too pale, her dark hair hung in limp strands around a face, but it was her eyes that unsettled him. They seemed to look through things rather than at them. "Has she been examined by a doctor?" Ray asked, keeping his voice low. "Physically, she's unharmed, aside from some minor burns and cuts on her feet," Margaret nodded. "Dr. Wen is expecting her. He's our resident psychologist." As they approached the entrance, the heavy wooden doors swung open to reveal a tall, gaunt woman in a gray dress, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. Throughout Millfield, Mrs. Eleanor Winters, the director of Evergreen, had a reputation for running a tight ship. "Miss Collins, officer," she greeted them with a curt nod. "This must be our new arrival." Her eyes settled on Eliza, who remained motionless in the back seat. "Come along, Eliza," Ray said, opening the car door. "This is your new home for now." Slowly, the girl stepped out, her movements mechanical. Nothing except a small, worn teddy bear, missing one eye, did she carry. Toward Eliza, Mrs. Winters extended a bony hand, but the girl made no move to take it. Instead, she stared up at the building, her gaze moving from window to window, as if searching for something or someone. Suddenly, she said, "My parents are waiting," her voice a dry whisper that sent an involuntary shiver down Ray's spine. They were the first words she had spoken since being found. Crouching down to Eliza's level, Margaret asked, "What was that, dear?" But clutching her teddy bear tighter to her chest, Eliza had fallen silent again. From his office window overlooking the front entrance, Dr. Thomas observed the new arrival. Smaller than he expected, the girl was almost lost in the shadow of Officer Dalton. Intrigued him, something about her stillness. He had seen various manifestations of shock in his 15 years working with traumatized children: violence, withdrawal, regression. But something different about this girl's demeanor existed. It wasn't vacant, as shock often appeared. It was watchful. Later, a knock came at his office door. "Come in," he called, closing Eliza's file and removing his wire-rimmed glasses. Mrs. Winters entered, followed by the girl. "Dr. One, this is Eliza Blackwood." Standing, Thomas offered a warm smile. "Hello, Eliza. I'm Dr. One, but you can call me Thomas if you'd prefer." Around the room, Eliza's eyes darted, taking in the bookshelves, the framed diplomas on the wall, the worn leather couch, and finally, the wooden floor, where her gaze lingered. "Thank you, Mrs. Winters. I'll take it from here," Thomas said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. With a sniff of disapproval, Mrs. Winters, who had never fully embraced psychological intervention, preferring the disciplinary approach of her generation, left, closing the door with a click that echoed in the quiet room. "Please have a seat," Thomas said, indicating the chair. On the edge, Eliza perched, her teddy bear in her lap, her feet dangling above the floor. "I understand you've been through something very difficult," he began. "Would you like to tell me about it?" Silent, the girl remained, her fingers working the worn fur of her bear. "That's a nice teddy you have there. Does he have a name?" "Mr. Buttons," she replied softly without looking up. "Hello, Mr. Buttons," Thomas said, leaning forward slightly. "Eliza, do you know why you're here at Evergreen?" Up to meet his, her eyes flicked, and Thomas was struck by their intensity. "Because they think my parents are dead." "And what do you think?" he asked gently. "They're waiting for me," she said, her voice oddly flat. "Underneath." "Underneath what, Eliza?" "Underneath the floorboards." Her gaze dropped to the wooden floor beneath them. "They're always underneath now." In her file, Thomas made a note: possible delusional thinking as a coping mechanism for parental loss. Not uncommon in traumatic circumstances. "Can you tell me about the night of the fire?" On the teddy bear, Eliza's fingers stilled. They were arguing again about the noises. "What noises?" "From underneath." "Dad said it was just the house settling. Mom said it was something else." Suddenly urgent, her expression looked up at Thomas. "They've been trying to come up for a long time now. They're waiting for me, too." A prickle of unease Thomas felt, but he kept his expression neutral. "Who's trying to come up, Eliza?" But she had retreated into silence again, her gaze fixed on the floor. For new arrivals, the first night at Evergreen was always the hardest. As it cooled in the evening, the building creaked and groaned, and down the long hallways, the distant sobs of homesick children echoed. To room 17, Eliza had been assigned, sharing with 13-year-old Susan Parker, who had been at Evergreen for 3 years since her mother's incarceration. With undisguised curiosity, Susan watched as Eliza placed Mr. Buttons carefully on the narrow metal bed. "Is that all you've got?" Susan asked, twirling a strand of her blonde hair around her finger. "No clothes or anything?" "Everything burned," Eliza replied, running her hand over the thin blanket. Susan's eyes widened. "In the fire?" "I heard about that. The whole house just poof." She made an explosive gesture with her hands. Nodding, still not looking at her roommate, Eliza. "That's tough," Susan said, softening slightly. "Mrs. Winters said you're going to get new clothes tomorrow from the donation bins." She wrinkled her nose. "They smell like mothballs, but it's better than nothing." A sharp rapping on the door interrupted them. In the doorway, Mrs. Winters stood, her thin lips pressed into a line. "Lights out in 5 minutes, girls." On Eliza, her gaze lingered. I trust you'll follow our rules here, Miss Blackwood. No wandering after hours. With that, she closed the door. She always knows, Susan whispered, climbing into her own bed. It's like she's got eyes in the walls. Fully clothed in the borrowed oversized t-shirt and sweatpants she'd been given upon arrival, Eliza lay down, staring up at the ceiling, where in the dim light filtering through the thin curtains, water stains formed abstract patterns. Susan, she said quietly. Yeah. What's underneath this building? On one elbow, Susan propped herself up. You mean like the basement? Just storage, I think. And the boiler room. Why? Can you hear them? Hear who? But Eliza had closed her eyes, signaling an end to the conversation. At precisely 2:17 a.m., to the sound of scratching, Susan awoke. In the darkness, she blinked, momentarily disoriented. Again the sound came, a persistent, methodical scratch, scratch, scratch. Toward Eliza's bed she turned, only to find it empty. Eliza, she whispered, sitting up. In the dim glow of the nightlight plugged into the wall socket, a small figure crouched on the floor in the center of the room could Susan make out. On her hands and knees, Eliza was, her fingers working at the wooden floorboards. What are you doing? Susan hissed, glancing nervously at the door. If Mrs. Winters catches you out of bed. Shoo, Eliza cut her off, not looking up from her task. I'm listening. Slipping out of bed, Susan padded across the cold floor. Listening to what? Them. They're louder at night. To the floor, Eliza pressed her ear. They're calling me. Down Susan's spine, a chill ran. She'd had strange roommates before, a girl who collected dead insects, another who spoke to an imaginary friend. But something about Eliza's intensity frightened her. You're going to get splinters, Susan said, tugging at Eliza's arm. Come on, get back in bed before. With a groan, the floorboard Eliza had been scratching at suddenly shifted. Both girls froze. See, Eliza whispered, a hint of triumph in her voice. They want me to find them. I'm getting Mrs. Winters, Susan backed away. No, Eliza said, grabbing her wrist with surprising strength. They'll stop if anyone else comes. They only talk to me. Hesitating, torn between fear of the strange new girl and fear of Mrs. Winters's punishment for being out of bed, Susan asked, What? What do they say? Almost dreamy, Eliza's expression softened. That they're waiting, that we'll be together soon. She turned back to the loose floorboard. Help me. Against her better judgment, Susan knelt beside Eliza. Together, they pried up the floorboard, revealing a small, dark space beneath. Up, the musty smell of old wood and dust wafted. There's nothing there, Susan said, relief evident in her voice. Into the space, Eliza reached and pulled out something that glinted in the faint light. A small silver locket. That's not yours, Susan said automatically. Opening the locket to reveal a tiny photograph of a smiling couple, Eliza whispered, It's them. My parents. At the picture, Susan peered. How did that get there? In the hallway, the sound of heavy footsteps sent both girls scrambling back to their beds. As she pulled the covers up to her chin, Susan's heart pounded, closing her eyes just as the door creaked open. Through barely parted eyelids, she saw Mrs. Winters's silhouette in the doorway, the beam of her flashlight sweeping across the room before withdrawing. When she was sure the woman had gone, Susan turned to look at Eliza, who lay motionless in her bed, the locket clutched tightly in her fist. Eliza, she whispered, how did your parents' locket get under our floor? But Eliza didn't answer. And in the dim light, Susan couldn't tell if her eyes were open or closed. The following morning at breakfast, Susan couldn't stop stealing glances at Eliza, who sat silently pushing soggy cornflakes around her bowl. The locket was nowhere to be seen, and Susan had begun to wonder if she'd dreamed the entire midnight encounter. You look like you've seen a ghost, Parker, said Kevin Reed, sliding onto the bench across from them. At 15, Kevin was one of the oldest residents at Evergreen and considered himself something of a leader among the children. Straightening, annoyed at his intrusion, Susan shot back, "Mind your own business, Reed." Smirking, Kevin turned his attention to Eliza. "You're the new girl. The one from the fire." It wasn't a question. From her bowl, Eliza didn't look up. "Hey, I'm talking to you," Kevin said, snapping his fingers in front of her face. "Leave her alone," Susan warned. Ignoring her, Kevin pressed on. "Is it true what they're saying? That you started the fire yourself?" To the table, Eliza's spoon clattered. The conversation at nearby tables hushed as children turned to watch. "I said, did you?" "They were already underneath when it started," Eliza said quietly. "The fire couldn't reach them there." Kevin's smirk widened. "Underneath what?" "The floorboards." Eliza finally looked up, meeting Kevin's gaze with unsettling directness. "They've always been underneath. Now they're waiting for me." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter spread through the dining hall. Leaning back, clearly pleased with the reaction he'd provoked, Kevin said, "You're a weirdo. You know that?" "That's enough, Mr. Reed." Dr. Wen's voice cut through the murmurs. He stood at the end of the table, a coffee mug in one hand. "Don't you have kitchen duty this morning?" Faltering, Kevin's smile vanished. With a final glance at Eliza, he slid off the bench and sauntered away, followed by his usual entourage. Taking the vacated seat, Thomas asked, "Good morning, Eliza. How was your first night?" Before she could answer, Susan blurted out, "She found something under the floor in our room." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Oh. A locket," Susan continued, ignoring Eliza's sharp look. "With a picture of her parents in it. Is that right, Eliza?" Thomas asked gently. "You found a locket?" Slowly, Eliza reached into the pocket of her borrowed jeans and withdrew the silver oval. Between them, she placed it on the table without a word. Carefully, Thomas picked it up, examining the tarnished silver before opening it. Inside was indeed a photograph, a handsome couple in their 30s, the woman with Eliza's same dark hair. "These are your parents?" Eliza nodded. "And you found this under the floorboards in your room last night?" Another nod. "May I ask why you were looking under the floorboards?" "I told you," Eliza said, her voice barely audible over the dining hall chatter. "They're underneath. Waiting." Neutral, Thomas's expression remained, but a note of concern entered his voice. "Eliza, I'd like you to come see me after breakfast. We can talk more in my office." As he walked away, Susan leaned closer to Eliza. "You're not in trouble, are you?" Slipping the locket back into her pocket, Eliza replied, "He doesn't believe me." "None of them do." She pushed her untouched bowl away and stood. "But they will." Across town at Dot's Diner, Officer Ray Dalton sat across from Fire Chief Bill Mercer, both men nursing cups of coffee that had grown cold. Between them lay a folder containing the preliminary report on the Blackwood House fire. "Electrical?" Ray asked, tapping the folder. His bushy mustache twitching, Bill shook his head. "No way. The fire started in at least 3 separate locations. That's deliberate." Frowning, Ray asked, "You saying one of the parents did it? Or someone else entirely?" Taking a sip of his coffee, Bill grimaced at its temperature. "What about the girl? She say anything?" "Nothing that makes sense. She keeps talking about her parents being underneath. Margaret Collins thinks it's trauma, that the kid can't accept they're dead." "No bodies," Bill mused. "No bodies," Ray confirmed. "We've gone over every inch of that rubble. Nothing. People don't just vanish, Ray." The bell above the diner door jingled as Margaret Collins entered, scanning the room before spotting the 2 men and hurrying over. "Officer Dalton," she said, slightly out of breath. "I'm glad I found you. Dr. Wen just called from Evergreen. There's something you need to see. 30 minutes later, Ray stood in Dr. Wen's office, turning the silver locket over in his hands. And the girl claimed she found this under the floorboards in her room last night. Thomas nodded. Her roommate confirms it. That's impossible, Margaret interjected. The Blackwood house was completely destroyed. Nothing was salvageable, let alone a delicate item like this. Studying the photograph inside the locket, Ray said, these are definitely Robert and Sharon Blackwood. I interviewed them last year when their shed was broken into. He looked up at Thomas. Could she have had it with her all along? Hidden it somehow? She was thoroughly examined at the hospital, Margaret said. She had nothing but the nightgown she was wearing. And you're certain this locket belonged to the Blackwoods? Thomas asked. Hesitating, Ray said, I can't be 100% sure, but Sharon always wore a locket. I remember noticing it during the interview. He closed the silver oval with a click. What I want to know is how it ended up under the floor of your facility, Doctor. Leaning forward in his chair, Thomas said, that's what concerns me as well, officer. Eliza insists her parents are underneath, specifically underneath floorboards. First at her home, now here. A delusion, Margaret said firmly. A coping mechanism. Perhaps, Thomas conceded. But this locket is very real, and it raises questions about what actually happened the night of the fire. Pocketing the locket, Ray said, I'll need to take this as evidence. And I'd like to speak with Eliza. She's in the recreation room, Thomas said, standing. But I should warn you, Officer Dalton. She's been drawing some rather disturbing pictures this morning. The recreation room was a large, sunny space at the back of the building. Eliza sat alone at a corner table, hunched over a sheet of paper, a box of crayons opened beside her. As the three adults approached, Ray could see she was drawing what appeared to be a house, a simple rectangle with a triangle roof, a chimney issuing gray smoke, and stick figures inside. Normal enough for a child's drawing, except all the stick figures were horizontal, lying under thick brown lines. Eliza, Thomas said softly. Officer Dalton would like to speak with you. From her drawing, the girl didn't look up. Have you found them yet? Crouching beside her chair, bringing himself to her eye level, Ray asked, Found who, Eliza? My parents. We're still looking, Ray said carefully. Can you tell me about this locket you found? On the paper, Eliza's crayon stilled. They left it for me. So I would know where to find them. Under the floorboards? Ray asked. She nodded, finally meeting his gaze. They're everywhere underneath now. In our house, here, everywhere I go. Eliza, Ray said gently. The fire chief and I searched your entire house. There was no one under the floors. You didn't look deep enough, she replied with unsettling certainty. They hide when others look. Margaret made a small, distressed sound, but Thomas silenced her with a look. Trying a different approach, Ray asked, Can you tell me about the night of the fire, Eliza? What happened? To her drawing, Eliza returned, adding more stick figures beneath the brown lines. They came up through the floor in Mom and Dad's room first. I heard Mom scream. Exchanging glances, Ray and Thomas turned back to the girl. Who came up through the floor? Ray asked. The others, Eliza said simply, as if it were obvious. They've been trying to come up for a long time. Dad said it was just the house settling, but it wasn't. She selected a red crayon. They took Mom and Dad underneath. Then they started the fire so no one would look for them. And how did you escape the fire, Eliza? Thomas asked softly. They don't want me yet, she replied, pressing the red crayon hard enough to tear the paper. But they will soon. A cold knot formed in Ray's stomach as he watched red wax bloom across the paper like blood. Eliza, was there someone else in your house that night? Someone who might have hurt your parents and started the fire? Putting down the crayon and looking directly at Ray, her gaze unnervingly steady, Eliza said, "They're not like you and me, Officer Dalton. They live underneath, in the dark, and they're hungry." Tugging at Ray's sleeve, pulling him a few steps away, Margaret whispered urgently, "This is a traumatized child creating a fantasy to cope with unimaginable loss. Continuing to indulge these delusions isn't helping her." "With all due respect, Miss Collins," Ray replied, keeping his voice low, "I have 2 missing persons and a case of suspected arson. If there's even a remote chance someone targeted the Blackwood family, I need to investigate every lead, however unusual." "I agree with Officer Dalton," Thomas interjected. "Something happened in that house, and Eliza is the only witness. Beneath the symbolic language, there may be valuable information." Pressing her lips into a thin line, Margaret said nothing more. Turning back to Eliza, who had resumed drawing, now adding more red to the space beneath the floorboards, Ray asked, "Eliza, would you be willing to show me where your parents are? To help me find them?" The crayon stilled again. "They'll hide from you. What if you came with me? Would they show themselves then?" A warning look, Thomas shot Ray, but the officer held up a hand, asking for patience. Seeming to consider this, her small face scrunched in thought, Eliza finally said, "Maybe. But not during the day. They only come out at night." By late afternoon, news of Eliza's strange claims had spread throughout Evergreen. Children whispered in corners, falling silent when she passed. In the girls' dormitory, Susan returned from her remedial math class to find her belongings moved to a different room. "Mrs. Winters said you requested a room change," said Jenny Miller, her new roommate, without looking up from her Tiger Beat magazine. Frowning, Susan said, "I didn't request anything." Shrugging, Jenny replied, "Well, I heard that weird new girl was talking to the floor all night. Can't blame you for wanting out." Biting her lip, Susan considered whether to correct Jenny's assumption. Before she could decide, a scream echoed down the hallway. Both girls rushed to their door. Across the hall, a small crowd had gathered outside room 17, Eliza's room. Pushing through the children, her face flushed with anger, Mrs. Winters demanded, "What is the meaning of this?" as she stepped into the room. Squeezing past Jenny, Susan edged closer, peering around the door frame. What she saw made her gasp. In the center of the room, the wooden floorboards had been pried up, creating a gaping hole about 3 feet wide. Around it, Eliza had arranged a circle of small objects, buttons, paper clips, shoelaces, and other seemingly random items. Cross-legged beside the hole, Eliza herself sat, rocking slightly, her lips moving in what appeared to be a silent conversation. "Miss Blackwood." Mrs. Winters's voice cracked like a whip. "Explain yourself this instant." Eliza didn't seem to hear her. She continued rocking, her gaze fixed on the darkness beneath the floor. "I want this mess cleaned up immediately," Mrs. Winters said, turning to the maintenance man who had appeared behind her. "Mr. Jenkins, please repair this floor. And you," she pointed at Eliza, "will come with me to discuss your punishment." As Mr. Jenkins stepped forward, Eliza's head snapped up. "Don't," she said, her voice oddly deep. "They don't like strangers looking." "That's quite enough, young lady," Mrs. Winters said, reaching for Eliza's arm. "This behavior is completely unacceptable." "I'm warning you," Eliza said, her expression suddenly fierce. "They'll take you, too." Hardening, Mrs. Winters's face turned to the maintenance man. "Mr. Jenkins, please escort Miss Blackwood to my office while you repair this damage." Hesitantly, the maintenance man, a heavy-set man in his 50s with thinning gray hair, stepped forward. "Come along now, miss," he said, extending a work-roughened hand to Eliza. For a moment it seemed Eliza would resist. Then, with surprising docility, she allowed herself to be led away, though her eyes never left the hole in the floor until she was out of sight. Reluctantly, the crowd of children dispersed under Mrs. Winters's stern gaze, leaving only Susan lingering in the doorway. Beside the hole, Mr. Jenkins knelt, whistling tunelessly as he examined the damage. "Kids," he muttered, shaking his head. What was she looking for down here anyway? Stepping into the room, Susan said, she says her parents are underneath. Surprise evident on his weathered face, Jenkins glanced up. Under what? The floor, Susan nodded. Well, there's nothing under here but crawl space, Jenkins said, reaching into his toolbox for a flashlight. And spiders. Lots of spiders. He leaned over the hole, shining his flashlight into the darkness. See, he said, tilting the light so she could peer down. Nothing. But he broke off suddenly, the beam of his flashlight fixed on something in the darkness. What is it? Susan asked, trying to see past him. Jenkins didn't answer. Instead, he reached into the hole, his thick arm disappearing up to the shoulder. When he withdrew it, he was holding what appeared to be a man's wallet. What the hell, he muttered, flipping it open. His eyes widened as he examined the driver's license inside. This can't be right. What? Susan persisted, standing on tiptoe to see. Snapping the wallet shut, his expression troubled, Jenkins said, nothing for you to worry about, miss. You run along now. Tell Mrs. Winters I need to make a phone call. As Susan reluctantly backed out of the room, she saw Jenkins staring at the hole in the floor, his earlier confidence replaced by obvious unease. Officer Ray Dalton was just preparing to end his shift when the call came in from Evergreen Children's Home. He listened in growing disbelief as the dispatcher relayed the message. You're sure about that name? He asked, already reaching for his keys. I'll be right there. 20 minutes later, he stood in room 17, turning Robert Blackwood's wallet over in his latex-gloved hands. The maintenance man, Jenkins, hovered nearby, his face pale. And you found this directly under the floor? Ray asked for the third time. Nodding, Jenkins said, right where the girl had been digging. It was just sitting there like someone had placed it deliberately. Carefully placing the wallet in an evidence bag, Ray asked, did you see anything else down there? No, sir. Just darkness and dust. Jenkins hesitated. But it felt wrong somehow. Cold. And there was a smell. What kind of smell? Shifting uncomfortably, Jenkins said, like something rotting. I thought it might be a dead rat or something, but... He trailed off, clearly reluctant to continue. But what? Ray pressed. Bad meat, Jenkins finally said. It smelled like bad meat. Ray's radio crackled to life. Officer Dalton, come in. Unclipping it from his belt, Ray responded, Dalton here. Fire Chief Mercer is requesting your presence back at the Blackwood property immediately. Says they found something during the secondary search. A cold weight settling in his stomach, Ray felt a dread he couldn't name. Tell him I'm on my way. He turned to Jenkins. I want this room sealed until I get back. No one comes in. Understood? Nodding, visibly relieved to have an excuse to leave the room, Jenkins said, yes, sir. As Ray drove toward the Blackwood property, his mind raced with possibilities. None of them good. The wallet's appearance was too convenient, too staged. Either someone was playing an elaborate, cruel hoax, or, he couldn't bring himself to complete the thought. The Blackwood property came into view, the charred skeleton of what had once been a family home stark against the fading daylight. Several fire department vehicles and another police cruiser were parked haphazardly in what had been the front yard. Near the foundation, Bill Mercer stood, deep in conversation with two firefighters. Parking and making his way through the debris, Ray asked, what have you got, Bill? Turning, his expression grim, the fire chief nodded toward a section of concrete that had been broken away, revealing a dark space beneath. We were doing a final structural assessment before clearing the scene. Found something underneath the foundation. Lowering his voice, he added, and Ray, there's blood. A lot of it. Peering into the opening, Ray saw a metal ladder descending into darkness. Anyone been down there yet? Waiting for you, Bill replied. Thought you'd want to see it undisturbed. Nodding, retrieving a flashlight from his belt, Ray said, "Let's go." Noticeably cooler, the air grew as Ray descended the ladder, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the thick darkness. The smell hit him first, the unmistakable coppery sweet odor of blood mixed with something older, mustier. His feet touched the earth floor, and he swept the light around what appeared to be a roughly dug chamber about 15 feet square. The walls were packed dirt, reinforced in places with timbers that looked far older than the house that had stood above them. This wasn't part of the original construction, Bill said, joining Ray at the bottom of the ladder. Someone dug this later. Ray's flashlight beam landed on a dark stain that spread across a significant portion of the dirt floor. "Jesus," he muttered. Crouching beside the stain, careful not to touch it, Bill said, "It's relatively fresh. Few days old at most." Continuing to pan his light around the chamber, Ray saw against one wall a crude table fashioned from wooden planks, its surface covered with strange objects. Small animal bones, jars containing unidentifiable substances, and what appeared to be primitive tools crafted from stone and bone. What the hell were the Blackwoods involved in? Bill whispered. Shaking his head at a loss, Ray's light caught something else, a small door set into the far wall, barely 4 feet high. "There's more," he said, moving toward it. The door was constructed of rough wooden planks bound with rusted metal. A heavy padlock secured it, but the hasp had been broken, leaving it hanging uselessly. "Someone's been here recently," Ray observed, pushing the door open with his foot. The beam of his flashlight revealed a narrow tunnel stretching into darkness. "This goes beyond the property line," Bill said, crouching to peer into the passage. "Could connect to the old mining tunnels. This whole area was honeycombed with them back in the 30s. Ray was about to respond when a sound echoed from deep within the tunnel. A faint, rhythmic scraping, like nails on stone. Both men froze. "Could be an animal," Bill suggested, though his tone lacked conviction. Drawing his service revolver, Ray said, "Stay here. I'm going to check it out." "Like hell," Bill replied, drawing a heavy flashlight from his belt that could double as a weapon. "I'm coming with you." Barely wide enough for one person, the tunnel forced them to proceed in single file, Ray leading with his gun and flashlight extended. Cool and slightly damp, the earthen walls were supported at intervals by ancient timber braces that groaned under the weight of the earth above. The sound had stopped, leaving only their labored breathing and the soft crunch of their footsteps on the packed dirt floor. After about 50 yards, the tunnel widened into another chamber, smaller than the first. Ray's flashlight illuminated crude symbols carved into the walls, spirals, stick figures, and more complex designs that made his skin crawl without knowing why. "Ray," Bill said suddenly, pointing to the center of the room. A large wooden chest sat there, its lid open. Even from the entrance, Ray could see it was empty. "Someone's cleared out whatever was in there," he said, approaching cautiously. "Recently, too. No dust inside." Sweeping the walls with his flashlight beam, Bill said, "These look old. Really old." Crouching beside the chest, Ray examined the area around it. "There's another tunnel," he said, pointing to a dark opening on the far side of the chamber, even smaller than the one they had just traversed. "And look." His light illuminated a set of small, bare footprints in the soft earth leading toward the second tunnel. Fresh footprints. Moving closer, his light joining Ray's, Bill finished grimly, "Those look like a child's." Eliza Blackwood was found barefoot, Ray. The implications hung in the air between them. Finally, Bill spoke, his voice tight. "You think she came through here? After the fire?" "I think she knew about this place," Ray replied slowly. "And I'm starting to think she knows a lot more about what happened to her parents than she's letting on." As if in response to his words, a distant sound echoed through the second tunnel. A low, mournful humming that raised the hair on the back of Ray's neck. "That's not an animal," Bill whispered. Raising his gun, moving toward the sound, Ray called out, "Millfield Police Department. Identify yourself." The humming stopped abruptly, replaced by silence so complete it seemed to have weight. Then, just as Ray was about to advance into the second tunnel, a child's voice drifted back to them, thin, distant, but unmistakably Eliza's. "They're waiting for you, too, Officer Dalton." By the time Ray and Bill emerged from beneath the Blackwood property, night had fallen. 3 more police cruisers had arrived, along with a van from the state forensics team. Ray quickly organized search parties to explore the tunnel system, though his hopes of finding Eliza or anyone else down there were fading. The tunnels branched off in multiple directions, creating a labyrinth that would take days to fully explore. "I want officers at Evergreen right away," he instructed Sergeant Perry. "No one goes in or out without my authorization. And find Dr. 1. I need to know everything," Eliza told him. As the search teams disappeared into the opening beneath the foundation, Ray stood in what had once been the Blackwoods' living room, trying to piece together a narrative that made sense. The image of Eliza's small footprints leading into that second tunnel haunted him. How had she known about the underground chambers? And how had she managed to return to Evergreen without being seen? His radio crackled. "Officer Dalton, come in." "Dalton here." "Sir, we've got a situation at Evergreen. Mrs. Winters can't locate the Blackwood girl." Ray closed his eyes briefly, a surge of adrenaline cutting through his exhaustion. "I'm on my way." The scene at Evergreen Children's Home was one of controlled chaos. Children in pajamas huddled in the recreation room under the watchful eyes of staff members while officers conducted a room-by-room search of the sprawling building. Mrs. Winters, her usual composure notably absent, paced the entrance hall. "I don't understand how this could happen," she said as Ray approached. "Our security protocols are rigorous. No child has ever left the grounds without authorization." "When was she last seen?" Ray asked, all business. "At dinner, around 6 p.m. When the evening head count came up short at 8:30, we discovered she was missing from her room. The room with the damaged floor." Mrs. Winters nodded stiffly. "Mr. Jenkins repaired it this afternoon." "I'd like to see it," Ray said. Room 17 appeared undisturbed at first glance. The floor had been neatly repaired, the wood of the replacement board slightly lighter than the surrounding floor. Ray crouched, running his fingers along the seams. "Solid work," he commented. "Mr. Jenkins is very thorough," Mrs. Winters replied. Standing, his gaze sweeping the room, Ray asked, "Were her belongings still here when you discovered she was missing?" "She had very little. Just some donated clothes and that teddy bear." Mrs. Winters hesitated. "The bear was gone. We assumed she took it with her." Ray nodded, his suspicions deepening. "Mrs. Winters, I need to know if Eliza said anything unusual to anyone today. Anything about her parents or about going somewhere?" The older woman's expression tightened. "Officer, that child has said nothing but unusual things since she arrived. Dr. Wen encouraged her delusions with his psychological mumbo-jumbo. And now we have a vulnerable minor missing." Ray bit back a sharp retort. "Where is Dr. Wen? I need to speak with him immediately." "In his office, I believe. He's been reviewing Eliza's file since we discovered her absence." Ray found Thomas when surrounded by papers, his wire-rimmed glasses pushed up on his forehead as he rubbed his tired eyes. "Dr. Wen," Ray said, closing the office door behind him. "We have a situation." Looking up, his expression grave, Thomas said, "I've heard. Eliza is missing." "Not just missing," Ray said, taking a seat across from the psychologist. "I believe she may have returned to her family's property. We found a system of tunnels beneath the house foundation." He hesitated. "And something else." "There was blood, Doctor. A lot of it." Removing his glasses entirely, his face paling, Thomas asked, "You think her parents were killed?" "I think it's a strong possibility. And I think Eliza knows more than she's telling us." Ray leaned forward. "We heard her voice in those tunnels, Doctor. She's been going back and forth somehow. But how? The properties are miles apart. The tunnel system is extensive. It could connect to old mining passages that run throughout this area. Ray paused. What I need to know is whether Eliza gave you any indication that she might try to leave. Or any more details about what she believes happened to her parents. Silent for a moment, organizing his thoughts, Thomas finally spoke. Eliza's case is unusual. Most children who experience trauma create protective fantasies that shield them from the worst of the pain. Eliza's narrative is different. It's consistent, detailed, and she believes in it absolutely. The people under the floorboards, Ray said. Thomas nodded. She calls them, the others. According to Eliza, they've lived beneath the ground for generations, occasionally taking people to join them. She believes her parents are now among them. Could this be her way of processing a violent event she witnessed? Perhaps an intruder killed her parents and started the fire to cover it up. It's possible, Thomas conceded. But there's something else that troubles me. Eliza doesn't exhibit the typical signs of trauma when discussing her parents' disappearance. There's no grief, no denial. Instead, there's anticipation. He met Ray's gaze directly. She believes she'll be joining them soon. A chill ran through Ray. You think she's planning something? I think she's waiting for something, Thomas corrected. And whatever it is, she expects it to happen very soon. The radio on Ray's belt crackled to life. Officer Dalton, we've got something. Basement level, east wing. Thomas was already on his feet. The boiler room, he said, leading the way out of the office. The basement of Evergreen Children's Home was a maze of narrow corridors and storage rooms, dimly lit by bare bulbs hanging from the ceiling. The air was noticeably cooler here, with the faint hum of the building's ancient heating system providing a constant background noise. Officer Mills met them at the bottom of the stairs. This way, he said, leading them past rows of shelving stacked with canned goods and cleaning supplies. Jenkins found it when he was checking the utility systems. The boiler room itself was a large space dominated by the massive iron heating unit that served the entire building. Steam pipes ran along the ceiling, disappearing into the walls. Mr. Jenkins stood beside the boiler, his face sheened with sweat despite the relative coolness of the basement. He pointed to the floor behind the hulking machine. There, he said simply. Ray and Thomas moved closer, and Ray felt his breath catch. A section of the concrete floor had been broken away, revealing a dark opening beneath. I was checking the pressure gauges when I noticed the draft, Jenkins explained. Thought there might be a crack in the foundation causing heat loss. Found this instead. Crouching beside the opening, shining his flashlight into the darkness, Ray saw that unlike the rough-hewn tunnels beneath the Blackwood property, this appeared to be a constructed passage with brick walls and a packed earth floor. How old is this building, Mrs. Winters? Ray asked, not taking his eyes off the passage. It was built in 1897, she replied from the doorway, her voice tight. Originally as a private residence for Edgar Whitman, the coal magnate. These could be remnants of the Underground Railroad, Thomas suggested. Many prominent houses in this area had hidden passages to help escaped slaves. Ray wasn't convinced. Maybe. But why would Eliza know about them when your staff didn't? He straightened, turning to Jenkins. Is this the only access point you found? The maintenance man nodded. So far. But I haven't had time to check the entire basement. Making a quick decision, Ray said, I'm going in. Mills, radio for backup. I want officers at every possible exit point from these tunnels, including the Blackwood property. Ray, Thomas said quietly. If Eliza is down there, she's likely frightened. A show of force might make the situation worse. Considering this, Ray asked, what do you suggest? Let me go with you. She trusts me, at least to some degree. After a moment's hesitation, Ray nodded. Stay behind me and do exactly as I say. Jenkins, I need a blueprint of the building's foundation if you have one. Within minutes, Ray and Thomas were descending into the passage, flashlight beams cutting through the thick darkness. The brick walls were damp with condensation, and their footsteps echoed ominously in the confined space. These aren't natural tunnels, Ray observed, noting the deliberate construction. Someone built these with a purpose. Running a hand along the brickwork, Thomas said, some of the oldest buildings in Millfield were rumored to have secret passages. During Prohibition, this area was a hotbed of bootlegging activity. They had walked about 100 yards when the passage widened into a circular chamber with 3 additional tunnels branching off in different directions. In the center of the chamber stood a stone pedestal, like a small altar, its surface covered with the same strange symbols Ray had seen beneath the Blackwood property. What is this place? Thomas whispered, his academic curiosity momentarily overriding his concern for Eliza. Approaching the pedestal cautiously, Ray said, I don't know. But these symbols match ones we found in a chamber under the Blackwood house. He ran his flashlight beam along the 3 passageways. Which way? As if in answer, a faint sound drifted from the leftmost tunnel. A child's voice, singing softly. That's Eliza, Thomas said, already moving toward the sound. Ray caught his arm. Wait. It could be a trap. A trap set by a 12-year-old girl? Thomas asked skeptically. A trap set by whoever killed her parents, Ray countered. We still don't know what we're dealing with here, Doctor. The singing continued, eerily beautiful in the subterranean darkness. Ray couldn't make out the words, but the melody raised goosebumps on his arms. I'm going, Thomas said firmly. That child needs help. Before Ray could stop him, Thomas had entered the left tunnel, his flashlight beam bobbing as he moved swiftly toward the source of the singing. Cursing under his breath, Ray followed. This passage was narrower than the first, forcing them to proceed in single file. The brick walls gave way to packed earth, supported by ancient timbers that creaked ominously above their heads. The air grew colder, their breath visible in the beams of their flashlights. The singing grew louder, and now Ray could make out words, not in English, but something older, with harsh consonants and flowing vowels that seemed to echo in his skull rather than his ears. What language is that? He whispered to Thomas. The psychologist shook his head. Nothing I recognize. They emerged into another chamber, smaller than the last. Here the packed earth floor gave way to flat stone slabs arranged in a circular pattern. In the center stood Eliza Blackwood, her eyes closed, arms outstretched as she sang her strange song. At her feet lay her teddy bear, positioned carefully in the center of a symbol carved into the stone floor. Eliza, Thomas called softly, not wanting to startle her. The singing stopped abruptly. Eliza's eyes opened, fixing on them with an unsettling intensity. You came, she said, her voice oddly flat. They said you would. Who said we would, Eliza? Thomas asked, taking a cautious step forward. My parents. And the others. She gestured to the stone floor around her. They're all here now. Waiting. Ray's flashlight beam swept the chamber, revealing more of the strange symbols carved into the walls and floor. Some appeared freshly cut, the stone dust still visible. Eliza, Ray said, keeping his voice calm. We need you to come with us now. It's not safe down here. A small smile played at the corners of the girl's mouth. It's safer than above. The fire can't reach us here. What fire, Eliza? Thomas asked. The one that's coming, she replied simply. They always burn what they can't take. That's why our house burned. That's why this place will burn, too. A chill that had nothing to do with the underground temperature ran through Ray. Eliza, he asked, did you start the fire at your house? The girl shook her head. Not me. Them. She pointed downward. They come up when everyone is sleeping. They take what they want and burn the rest. And what do they want, Eliza? Thomas asked gently. People, she said, as if it were obvious. They're so hungry. Ray's radio crackled, making both men jump. Officer Dalton, come in. Unclipping it from his belt, he responded, Dalton here. Sir, we've got smoke on the second floor of the east wing. Fire department's been called, but it's spreading fast. Eliza's smile widened. They've started, she said. Now you have to choose. Stay with me, or go back to burn. Moving forward quickly, grasping Eliza's shoulders, Thomas said, Eliza, there's a real fire upstairs. People could be hurt. We need to leave now. The girl didn't resist his touch, but she made no move to accompany him. I'm staying with my parents. Your parents aren't here, Eliza, Ray said firmly. Whatever you believe happened to them, this isn't where they are. You're wrong, she replied, her voice suddenly deeper, more adult. They're right beneath us. Listen. As if on cue, a low rumbling sound began, like the growl of some massive beast deep in the earth. The stone floor beneath their feet trembled slightly. That's just the fire upstairs, Ray said, though a note of uncertainty had crept into his voice. We need to go now. Crouching to Eliza's eye level, Thomas said, Eliza, I promise we'll come back and look for your parents once it's safe. But right now, we all need to get out of here. For a moment, indecision flickered across the girl's face. Then, with a reluctance that was palpable, she nodded. They'll wait, she said. They're patient. Taking her hand, and to Ray's relief, she allowed herself to be led toward the tunnel entrance. Ray followed, keeping his flashlight trained on the passage ahead while occasionally glancing back at the stone chamber. They had nearly reached the junction with the main passage when Ray noticed the air had grown hazy with the unmistakable smell of smoke drifting down from above. The fires reached the basement, he said, quickening his pace. Gripping Eliza's hand tighter, Thomas asked, Is there another way out, Eliza? Another way up to the surface? The girl nodded. The big tunnel. It goes all the way to my old house. Making a quick decision, Ray said, Lead the way. Eliza took them back to the circular chamber with the pedestal, selecting the rightmost of the 3 tunnels without hesitation. This passage was wider and taller than the others, its construction more deliberate with smooth stone walls rather than packed earth or brick. People made this one long ago, Eliza explained as they hurried along. Before the others came up and made them forget. Ray glanced at Thomas, who shook his head slightly, silently advising against challenging her narrative while they were still underground. The tunnel seemed to stretch endlessly, curving gradually to the right as it continued. Just when Ray was beginning to wonder if they were moving in circles, Eliza stopped. Here, she said, pointing to what appeared to be a solid stone wall. Running his flashlight beam over the surface, finding no obvious door or opening, Ray said, There's nothing here, Eliza. You have to know where to push, she replied, stepping forward and placing her small hands on a specific section of the wall. With a faint grinding noise, a portion of the stone slid inward, revealing a narrow opening. How did you know that? Ray asked, unable to keep the amazement from his voice. They showed me, Eliza said simply. The first night after the fire. Beyond the hidden door lay another passage, this one sloping gently upward. The air here was fresher, suggesting they were approaching the surface. After another 100 yards, they reached a set of stone steps leading up to what appeared to be a wooden trapdoor. Ray went first, pushing cautiously against the door. It swung upward with surprising ease, revealing a night sky scattered with stars. He climbed out, then helped Thomas and Eliza up after him. They emerged into a small clearing in the woods, surrounded by pine trees that swayed gently in the night breeze. In the distance, an orange glow lit the sky. Evergreen Children's home was engulfed in flames. My God, Thomas breathed, staring at the distant fire. I hope everyone made it out. Ray's radio crackled again. Officer Dalton, do you copy? Dalton here. I've got Dr. One and the Blackwood girl. We exited through some kind of underground tunnel network. What's your position? Looking around, trying to get his bearings, Ray said, not sure exactly. Wooded area, maybe half a mile from the Blackwood property. Stay put. We'll send officers to find you. Clicking off the radio, turning to Eliza, who was watching the distant fire with an unsettling calm, Ray asked, Eliza, I need you to tell me the truth now. Did you start that fire? The girl shook her head. I told you. They did. The others? Ray pressed. The people you say live underneath? They're not people, Eliza corrected. Not anymore. Placing a gentle hand on her shoulder, Thomas asked, Eliza, what do you mean, not anymore? But before she could answer, a new sound cut through the night, a low, rhythmic drumming that seemed to come from the earth itself. Brightening, Eliza's expression showed excitement. They're calling, she said. They want to meet you. Moving instinctively to his service weapon, Ray's hand tightened. Who wants to meet us, Eliza? My parents, she replied. And all the others who went before. The drumming grew louder, and to Ray's alarm, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. A few yards away, the earth started to bulge upward, as if something large were pushing its way to the surface. We need to go, Ray said urgently, reaching for Eliza. Now. I knew you'd wait for me, she said, her voice muffled against what had been her father's chest. I told them you were underneath, but they didn't believe me. Backing away, pulling Thomas with him, Ray hissed, we need to run. Right now. But Thomas seemed transfixed by the scene before them. What are they? He whispered. What's happening? The Great Rising, the Sharon thing answered, though Thomas hadn't directed the question to her. Every 100 years, we come to the surface to gather new ones. To bring them underneath, where the true life begins. More creatures were emerging, dozens now, forming a loose circle around the clearing. Ray realized with growing horror that they were being surrounded, cut off from escape. The fire is our herald, the Robert thing added. It cleanses the above world, preparing it for our return. Soon, all will be underneath. Turning back to Ray and Thomas, her expression serene, Eliza said, don't be afraid. It doesn't hurt. And then you get to be with us forever. The creatures were closing in now, their movements becoming more confident as they adjusted to the surface world. Ray fired his gun again, emptying his clip into the nearest figures, but they barely flinched. Thomas, Ray said, his voice tight with fear and determination. When I say run, head for the trees. Don't stop. Don't look back. Nodding, his academic composure shattered by the impossibility of what they were witnessing, Thomas asked, what about Eliza? Glancing at the girl who stood happily between the twisted forms of her parents, Ray said, I don't think Eliza wants to be saved. As if confirming his assessment, Eliza spoke again. The fire will take this world soon. But underneath, we'll be safe. We'll wait until it's time to come up again. The creatures were almost upon them now, their long fingers reaching, black eyes reflecting the distant flames. Ray counted silently, waiting for the narrowest gap in their circle. Now, he shouted, shoving Thomas toward the trees. They ran, crashing through undergrowth, branches whipping at their faces. Behind them, a chorus of unearthly howls rose, the creatures giving chase with a speed that seemed impossible for their emaciated forms. The trees thinned ahead, revealing the gravel road that led to the Blackwood property. Ray's police cruiser sat where he had left it hours ago, keys still in the ignition. There, he gasped, pointing. They sprinted the final yards, Ray reaching the car first and wrenching open the driver's door. Thomas scrambled into the passenger seat just as the first of the creatures emerged from the tree-line. Ray jammed the key into the ignition, the engine roaring to life. He threw the car into reverse, tires spinning on the gravel as he executed a hasty three-point turn. As he shifted into drive, he caught a glimpse of Eliza in the rearview mirror, standing at the edge of the woods between her transformed parents, watching with that same serene smile. The cruiser fishtailed onto the main road, accelerating away from the Blackwood property. Neither man spoke for several minutes, the only sound their ragged breathing and the roar of the engine as Ray pushed the vehicle to its limits. Finally, as the adrenaline began to ebb, Thomas broke the silence. "What were those things, Ray? What did we just see?" Shaking his head, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, Ray said, "I don't know. I don't think I want to know. They looked like people who had adapted to living underground. Evolved. Or devolved. They weren't human," Ray said firmly. "Not anymore." Staring out the window at the darkened Pennsylvania countryside rushing past, Thomas murmured, "And Eliza, she knew. She knew all along. She tried to tell us," Ray said softly. "Her parents were underneath, waiting." The radio crackled, a dispatcher's voice cutting through their stunned reflection. "All units be advised. Evergreen Children's Home is fully engulfed. Fire department reports structure likely to be a total loss. All occupants accounted for except Officer Dalton, Dr. One, and the Blackwood girl. Search teams are." Grabbing the radio, Ray interrupted. "This is Officer Dalton. Dr. One is with me. We're on Route 27, heading toward town." "And the Blackwood girl?" Hesitating, meeting Thomas's gaze, Ray wondered what they could say. Who would believe them? "Officer Dalton, please confirm status of the Blackwood girl." "She's..." Ray began, then sighed. "She's with her parents now." As they crested a hill, the full extent of the disaster came into view. Evergreen Children's Home was a pillar of flame against the night sky, emergency vehicles surrounding it with flashing lights that seemed feeble in comparison to the inferno. And beyond, in the direction they had fled, more fires were visible, spreading through the woods, consuming everything in their path. "It's happening just like she said," Thomas murmured. "The fire is coming." Ray's grip tightened on the wheel. "We need to warn people. Evacuate the town. And tell them what? The creatures from beneath the ground are rising. They'll think we're insane. We tell them about the fire," Ray said grimly. "That's real enough." As they approached the outskirts of Millfield, Ray slowed the cruiser, his eyes drawn to the road ahead, where the asphalt appeared to be bulging upward in several places. "No," he whispered. "It can't be." Following his gaze, his face paling, Thomas said, "They're coming up everywhere." Ray stopped the car, his mind racing. The town of Millfield lay before them, its residents sleeping peacefully, unaware of the horror emerging from below. "We have to try," he said, reaching for the radio again. But before he could call in the alarm, the road ahead split open, a gaping wound in the earth from which pale, elongated figures began to emerge. Among them, clearly visible in the cruiser's headlights, was a small figure, Eliza Blackwood, her eyes now as black and fathomless as those of the others, her smile revealing newly pointed teeth. "They're waiting for you," she called, her voice carrying clearly through the closed windows of the car. "Underneath. Where everyone will be soon." Ray threw the cruiser into reverse, tires squealing as he executed a hasty turn. "We'll go around," he said, his voice tight. "There has to be another way into town." But as they retreated, they saw more ruptures appearing in the earth, more of the pale figures emerging onto the surface world they had abandoned so long ago. The night was filled with their unearthly howls, a triumphant chorus announcing their return. In the days that followed, as fire consumed much of Millfield and the surrounding countryside, as search teams found empty houses with strange openings beneath floors and foundations, as more and more people disappeared without a trace, Ray Dalton and Thomas told their story again and again. Few believed them. Most attributed their tale to smoke inhalation, trauma, or simple madness. The official report cited a gas leak at Evergreen Children's Home as the cause of the initial fire, with dry conditions and strong winds causing it to spread. The disappearances were blamed on panicked evacuation, poor record-keeping, and the chaos of the disaster. But in the years that followed, as Millfield was gradually rebuilt, people noticed changes. Cellars were eliminated from new construction. Concrete slabs replaced the wooden floors that had once been standard. And no one, absolutely no one, spoke of what might lie beneath. The old Polaroid photograph trembles slightly in my hands as I stare at the faded image. A girl, no older than 12, standing rigidly before a looming Victorian house. Her eyes are hollow, vacant, as if something behind them has been extinguished. This is the last image ever taken of Eliza Blackwood. I place it carefully back in the box with my late uncle's notes, his desperate attempts to make sense of what he and Officer Dalton witnessed that night in 1973. Most would dismiss it as the ravings of traumatized men, or perhaps a strange mass hysteria that took hold during a natural disaster. But I know better. Because sometimes, in the darkest hours of the night, I hear them, too. The scratching, the whispering, the soft percussion of inhuman fingers drumming against the underside of the floor. They're still there. Still waiting underneath. And I wonder, with a chill that seeps into my bones, how long until they rise again.